Before we dive in, I want to say something. Today we'll be talking about Tradwives, which is short for traditional wife. It refers to a woman who embraces a domestic lifestyle centered on homemaking, child rearing, and submission to her husband's authority. It's often framed as a return to traditional values. The term Tradwife has taken on a viral identity online, especially on TikTok, Instagram, and in conservative media circles. This episode isn't about shaming women who choose to live traditionally or stay home with their kids. We believe in informed choice, and if your choice brings you peace, safety, and joy, we support that. This conversation is about the broader systemic forces that shape the Tradwife ideal and why it can become dangerous when used to enforce or romanticize inequality.
Today we are joined by Margaret Bronson, widely known as the deconstruction doula. Once an evangelical Tradwife, Margaret has since become a powerful voice for women dismantling patriarchal systems. Featured in Elle magazine and known on Instagram as @deconstructiondoulas, she shares her personal story from domestic submission to feminist awakening, offering insight into the emotional, cultural, and relational toll of the Tradwife ideal. Through her advocacy, she's helped women break free from patriarchal, often abusive, marriages and reclaim their autonomy.
Hi, Margaret. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi.
We're so glad to have you here and excited to have this conversation.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, yeah. So can you explain to me, first of all, what it means to be a deconstruction doula? I love that term, by the way, and how that title kind of came about.
So we start with the deconstruction part. If you go to one of these like gastronomy type of restaurants, you get like lasagna, but it's not like a normal piece of lasagna. Now it's broken into its constituent parts. You've got your cheese over here and your pasta here and your sauce here, and you can kind of evaluate each of them individually and mix up the proportions, like more sauce, more cheese, less pasta, whatever it is. So we're kind of doing that with ideas, with belief systems. We're taking, a lot of us were raised Christian or like a very conservative Christian or specific sect within that. And what we're doing is we're taking all of the different aspects of not just the belief system, but also the lifestyle or the like culture around it and evaluating it for, is this right? Does this fit with what I actually think and feel, instead of having to take the whole thing like, are you a Christian? Check yes or check no. That's a lot. Breaking it into its smaller parts. But that's a lot of work. It's an ancient faith. It is a global faith. There's a lot there. And so there's also a lot of feeling attached with it. So the doula part comes in there. If you think about giving birth, you could have like your OB-GYN or your midwife, and they're making decisions for you. They're kind of directing how the birth goes. A doula is the person who comes alongside you, and they're not making decisions for you, but they're making sure that you understand the decisions that have to be made, that you have the information you need to like feel trusting and relaxed in the process. They're making sure you're fed and you're rested. They're making sure that you are safe at home. They know where to apply pressure to help relieve pain during contractions. They're there to walk through it with you, not tell you how to do it or what to believe or what to do. And so in the context of the work that I do, a lot of the people who come to me have been in faith cultures where there wasn't a lot of room for curiosity or autonomy or choice or variation, nuance. And so what we do at Deconstruction Doula is we try and make space. We try and like almost put our arms around them and like make a bubble so they can like think through things for themselves. We tell them they're doing a good job. If they have specific questions, we can point them in the direction of, specific books. Things like that is where we come alongside and support people in the process of deconstructing their faith and figuring out what they actually think and believe. And then the way that I got the name was actually, I'd been doing the work for a while. I had a cohort that I was with, and one of the women who herself is a birth doula was like, I think you're a deconstruction doula. And it just stuck.
I cannot get over how perfect the presentation that was, but also the whole idea, the deconstruction, the lasagna, like that's an amazing visual. And then the doula compare. I mean, I just think that's a whole incredible, a lot packed into 2 words. It's really great.
Thank you. Well, I have nothing to do with it. It just happened.
That's kind of how Pink Pill happened, like that phrase. It happened. A follower of mine really early on, like at the very beginning, was like, oh, it's kind of like pink pilling, haha, kind of like the Matrix. And I contacted her. I was like, can I use that term? And she's like, oh, yeah, sure. And now it's like a term that's being used. And so it just kind of accidentally came about.
That's amazing. So I've loved PinkpillRx. That's amazing.
So you grew up super conservative, right? Like strict, I believe, Baptist when we had spoken prior to this. And so how did that shape your views on gender and womanhood? And kind of like, what is your background with that?
Where I was raised, there wasn't really any options for women outside of being stay-at-home moms. It's a little bit interesting with my particular story because we came into the cult later. I was like almost 10 by the time we were getting there. And so my mom actually worked a high-powered job. She was the manager of the ICU at the VA. But she left that and came home to homeschool us. So I have like kind of a slightly different experience of it than others who grew up with me. Yeah, we were told, it was a sin for women to work outside the home, that it was emasculating for women to make more than their husbands, that there was a lot of talk about like the value of raising children and how this was worthy work and like beautiful work. And they would say that men are the rulers of their house, but women are the rulers of their home. Like they get to, pick the food and the curtains and, homeschool the kids or whatever. And so for me, I definitely grew up, I've always wanted to be a mom. And so I enjoyed envisioning myself as a mom. And that's pretty much all I ever knew I was going to be. I knew I wanted to do other things, but they would always be like secondary to that, which I think is more than my peers. Like the fact that I had other things that I wanted to do was a lot more than my peers. In fact, it created issues growing up because a lot of the girls that I was with weren't allowed to like really read books much. We weren't allowed to like watch a lot of movies and TV shows. And so I was a voracious reader. And I remember getting really frustrated with the girls at my church because all they'd want to talk about was like how many windows they cleaned. Like I remember a specific conversation. This girl lived in this really big house and she'd counted all the windows and she was like showing off how many windows she'd cleaned that day and talking about taking care of younger siblings. There were girls who were literally like, they were the co-sleepers with their 2-3-year-old siblings, putting their kids to bed at night, taking care of children all through the night, doing the middle of the night feedings and diaper changes and everything. And so like, that's the kind of stuff they were talking about. And I had the luxury of not having a ton of younger siblings. And so I was reading lots of books and I wanted to talk about books. But they couldn't engage on that level. And so it was like already their world was so small. They were already so limited in what they could even imagine for themselves. They couldn't even imagine having a room to themselves and like going to sleep all night.
Oh, that is really sad. I can't relate to that extreme because that wasn't my personal experience, but I can relate to the higher education wasn't really encouraged. You were expected that you were just going to have, go on and have babies, and everything that was happening in the homeschool environment household was to prepare you to be a homemaker, learning how to cook and to clean and to take care of kids and all that stuff. And there was this promise that came with it, that this was what was going to make you the most fulfilled and the most happy. And it really sold that way. Anything outside of this was going to make you miserable.
Absolutely. And there's so much variation in it. Like I was in a very, very extreme version of it, but I wasn't even like, I wasn't a native to that, right? I was there, but like looking in from the outside a little bit. But, throughout our cohorts, it's really interesting to see the spectrum because we have women who, they did go to college, but it was, the culture and what the expectation was you were going to college to get married. Like you weren't going to college to start a career. They were getting their MRS degree is the joke, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a Christian college near us that's a big joke around the campus is getting your MRS degree.
So funny, huh?
Ring by spring.
Ring by spring. Yeah, so you mentioned your cohorts and you do groups. Are they retreats where women come and they can kind of like deconstruct this? Is it the trad wife ideal that they've kind of been raised in, or that they have not just been raised in, I guess, probably married into as well? And they're coming together. And what is that like when women join your groups? What are some of the biggest things they realize or admit for the first time?
So, sometimes the first things that come out is people just like admitting that they're exhausted or unhappy or like feeling trapped in their life. And then from there, it's almost like, well, why do I feel that way? There's a lot of like, they've been so frightened away from pursuing that line of thinking. Why am I upset? Why am I not happy? Because then that would lead to like, well, maybe I don't have enough faith. Maybe I'm not a good enough mom. Maybe I don't love my husband enough. Maybe I'm not grateful enough. Maybe I'm just bad at this.
You're not praying
right?
hard enough.
Exactly. You get kind of trapped in your head. And so just admitting and saying out loud, something's not right, and I don't even know what it is often like where people are coming into cohorts. And then through the process of being together with other women where we've established like these questions are so safe and so okay, and we are going to trust ourselves to get through them. And, everyone's kind of processing their own different things together. You end up having people realize like they actually didn't really give consent to get married.
Okay, can you expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was raised, and not everyone in my like deconstruction doula world was raised this way, but I would say about half of us were raised in courtship culture. So we were not allowed to date, we had to court, and there are variations on it, but I'm just going to give kind of like the most average idea of courtship culture, and that is that you do not ever go on any dates by yourself. You and your significant other are always chaperoned, often by parents or younger siblings. You can't date anyone until you've gotten like both parents' permission, like his parents, her parents. And it's happening young. We're talking like starting courting 16, 17, 18 years old with the intention of like, you're getting there in these cultures, you're depending on the specific one, you're an old maid by 20, 22, 24, somewhere in there. Because your entire childhood, right, is about taking care of your younger siblings so that someday you can be a good mom, honoring and respecting your father so that someday you can be a good wife, learning how to cook, clean, manage a budget, all the things so that you can do this, right? Your entire life is building up towards this marriage. And then finally there's a guy that your dad says you can be with and he likes you. The attention feels nice, right? It's fine. Everyone's happy with you for the first time, right? Like everyone's like, oh, you did it. You're courting someone.
Suddenly
this is so
interested
great.
in you.
Absolutely. You're getting more attention, affection, and approval than you've ever gotten in your life. And these courtships go fast. I've got girls who courted for like 6 weeks and were married. And they were never alone with him. And so when it's like, did you give consent? Well, first of all, they're 18. They're 17. They were never alone with him. They didn't even know what questions to think about asking. You know what I mean?
Right.
The things you were taught to ask is, do you love Jesus? And then if you were Calvinist, are you Calvinist? And if you weren't Calvinist, you're not Calvinist. It's pretty much, are you going to be okay with homeschooling the kids? Like that was basically like check, check, check. Okay, we can get married.
Yup. Yeah, some of that sounds
So,
familiar.
yeah, so they're in their 30s and they're like, actually, I don't know if I ever consented to this. And they've got like 5 kids with him.
Right. And then what are you going to do? Because you don't have an education. You realize you're in a relationship you didn't consent to, and you have children to take care of. I mean, it's its own, and it's by design to keep women where they want them to be.
Yeah, and it's such a crappy position to like almost wake up as a sentient being and realize you're here. And every situation is different. We obviously have a lot of separations and divorces, but we also have a lot of women who are like, okay, this is where we're at. Let's see what we can do to make it work. We have cohorts, groups, like small groups of like 8 to 10 women with pretty much every answer on the spectrum represented in that, and like supporting each other through the way that their journey with this situation is playing out. And again, that's not the situation everyone shows up with cohorts with. Sometimes the thing that they realize is they were in ministry for the first 20, 10, 15 years of their adult life, and they realize that they actually don't agree with the methodology or the culture of ministry that they were a part of. And so there's a grief there. There's feelings of like complicity, guilt, shame, things like that to work through. It's messy. There's messy stuff that comes out. Everyone's got to go to therapy.
Yeah, and I think the culture too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to just pretend that everything's fine. And on social media, to project that this picture perfect, sepia toned, everything's great, this is the life, I was married prior to Jay. I was married for 8 years. I got married to somebody that I had met and married within 7 months. And it was very much, do you love Jesus? Check mark. He was in ministry, check mark. What else can you ask for?
That's a dream, right?
Yeah,
there.
right. And so when I'm referring back to, oh, this sounds familiar, or I can relate to that, that's the situation I'm referring to, not my current marriage. But this was a previous marriage that I got out of. But I just remember being so disassociated from everything. Because I just had to be. I couldn't face my reality the way that it was. I had to be so disassociated. And it took forever for me to be able to be present again. So much therapy because I was so disassociated from what was happening. Because the promise was, all you need is this guy, and then you're going to be happy. You're going to get the attention that you want. You're going to be provided for. You're going to be happy because you're going to have kids and they're going to fulfill you. And then when this stuff didn't come to fruition for me, I was like, oh my gosh, now what? There's something wrong with me, obviously, because this whole world that I'm living in is telling me that this should make me happy, or, this should grow me in a positive spiritual way or whatever. And it was not, because I ultimately became suicidal. A lot of women do in these kind of very oppressive situations, because getting a divorce is the worst thing that you could possibly do. I remember that. It was when I was considering getting a divorce, it's I don't even know if I could do that, because that's a ticket straight to hell, first of all. And secondly, I'm going to lose my community. And so I didn't mean to hijack that conversation. I just wanted to give context to my commentary.
I think it's super helpful, because I think a lot of people think this is the fringe experience. If you grow up in these conservative circles or whatever, and it's I think we just don't talk about it. I think a lot of us women, once we do get out, we don't want to look back. We don't want to talk about it. We want to keep moving on with our life. And there's also a lot of education and judgment that comes with it. Well, why did you put yourself in that position? There's not a recognition of the lack of autonomy and the lack of education, the intentional lack of educating girls to be able to navigate these situations for themselves. And then just everyone is involved in your relationship. There's so much pressure. It's not just you got married. There's a whole faith that's relying on you to keep this marriage going and keep looking good. And you make the church look bad, you make your family look bad. It's so much. And yeah, people feel really, really trapped.
Why do you think the Tradwife aesthetic is so appealing right now? What do you think people often miss behind the reality of it?
Okay, I've got several answers to this question. One is, I think, first of all, it just looks really pretty on Instagram. Like, Instagram favors those really like pretty pictures. I don't know. It looks nice.
Yes.
But I think a deeper answer is that I think a lot of us are exhausted from the rat race of modern technology and the capitalism and all of it. I think all of us are missing that feeling of things being real. Like, if we all had the time, I'm sure all of us would want to get our hands dirty in the earth or cook or do woodworking or do something where we can take something from raw materials to a finished product. There's something very like restorative to our souls about that. I think we're longing for that. The problem is that's how cults work. They always identify a real problem. Like, we need to slow down. We need more realness, wholeness, completeness, like historically humanness in our life. I think a lot of us are tired of the fake and the corporate. But cults are really good at identifying real problems and then offering things that look like real solutions but are actually a trap. And so the problem is, we'll have to see. We'll see. My theory is that the trap is not for the women who choose it, it's for their children. Because if you autonomously choose to go into a Tradwife life, like a lot of my peers' parents did, the consequences to them are not nearly the consequences to their children.
That's a good point.
Our entire education was part of it. Our entire perspective of the world, our being sheltered. We were so innocent and unprotected from a lot of things, a lot of evils. We were easily taken advantage of, and we don't autonomously choose it. The choice is already made for us. We're already trapped. Again, wake up at 35 years old and realize I've not chosen a thing in my life. And here I am, saddled with unbelievable amounts of responsibility, with no support because I am not doing it well enough to continue earning support from my community. I'm pretty much up a creek without a paddle.
I want to circle back to something that you said that I think is really important. When you said that I'm sure everybody would love to get their hands dirty and work the earth and stuff. And I think that the Tradwife movement as it stands now is very exclusive because there is so many women who do not have this option. This is not an option for them. Maybe single mothers that are in a situation where they have to go out and they have to work and they don't have somebody that can support them. And that's kind of like a privileged stance to start at. The
daughters of the people who autonomously choose this also can't do the Tradwife thing. We have so many chronic illnesses. We're so exhausted after being moms and housemakers our entire childhoods, and then immediately being in a situation that, despite preparing for marriage our entire lives, we weren't prepared for because we never had to navigate, and interact. We were so sheltered. We don't know how to have these interactions and how to collaborate and do conflict resolution and whatever, and you don't know this person you're married to, and you don't have a way to financially help. And also the economy has been falling apart our entire lives and just getting worse and worse and worse. And so going from one income as a kid to one income as an adult is a real step down,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's one of the crappiest parts is it's not even something that can be transferred to the next generation.
I feel like the Tradwives are exhausted by the time their parenting is over. Not over, by the time their children turn 18, that they are ready to hand over these children. You take them, no return policies. Here you go. And they hand them over. And the parents don't want to parent through adulthood. And we need parents in our adulthood. But it seems like when you hit 18 or when you leave the house or whatever that looks like, all of a sudden it's like, you shouldn't need me anymore. And I'm not even talking about financially. I'm talking about like emotionally or being like present, for like grandkid things. What about that? Like, I mean, are they involved grandparents? Because I think that they're exhausted. Do you see that?
I absolutely see that. And it's actually like a really intense pattern. These are the most hands-off, distant, cold set of grandparents. I actually forget that there can be involved grandparents sometimes. Just because in my little, like, all my friends, I've lived far away from family for a long time, so I've had that part. But with my friends, like, none of them have, parents really involved in their lives. And part of that is, there's this wedge of beliefs, it doesn't matter if you're still a Christian if you don't do things the same way, if you don't, vote the same way, prioritize the same things, have the same lifestyle. The grandparents are not involved. And also, you have situations where you have, like, the women who autonomously chose this, they're having their, like, 9th child at the same time as their oldest child is having her baby.
Yep.
And so they're, like, literally raising children while they're supposed to be grandparenting, but they can't. There's a lot of situations where 6th, 7th, 8th children basically get neglected. By the time, like, a bunch of the kids are out of the house, there's only 2 or 3 left at home. They're really fending for themselves. There's not a lot of oversight. There's, like, we joke a lot in deconstruction doulas, like, if you were the front half, you were micromanaged every second of the day. And the second half, you're lucky if they caught you doing, like, real bad stuff,
Yeah. Yeah, no, we joke because I'm one of 8 and the first 4 had a very different childhood than the last 4.
I have a quick question about the grandparent thing. So would you say it's accurate that it kind of perpetuates the cycle? Because if you have uninvolved grandparents, then you are going to rely more on your older daughters to then do all this stuff because you don't have involved grandparents. And then you do that to the daughters. The daughters then have the childhood experience of being kind of like moms. Then they have kids. And then when their kids are grown, they become the uninvolved grandparents because they're just done. And it just keeps kind of
generational
going on.
Absolutely. And I think it's backed up by the fact that I really need to actually do the math on this, but it's definitely north of 70% of the women in my cohorts are oldest daughters.
Whoa. Okay.
It's like the entire system rises and falls on the backs of oldest daughters. We're the ones who marry the men who have the children, who do everything right. Our younger sisters often are off doing their own thing. They didn't try to follow the rules as much. And so they're not nearly as traumatized. They're not nearly as trapped because they disobeyed. It's like such a crazy thing to say.
And if they don't have a lot of siblings that are younger than them, they're not going to have to do the same type of child rearing because they're towards the end of the pack.
And then another pattern, sorry, I'm autistic, so all I see is patterns. The other pattern is, so those younger siblings, they end up choosing the Tradwife lifestyle because they never tasted the poison. They got taken care of. They had a mom. They had a big sister. And so they don't know. They just always had friends. They always had big siblings taking care of them. The women in my cohorts have mental illnesses, chronic illnesses, suicidality, all these things, and no one in their family realizes it was a problem. Everyone's still like, it was fine. It was great because she stayed up till midnight doing the dishes for 10 people, because they wouldn't buy a dishwasher because how do you buy a dishwasher when you have 10 kids?
Yeah.
She did all of the waking up throughout the night to take care of the children. And she never got an education because she was too busy momming a lot of children. And then she's supposed to what? Do night school with 4 kids in her own home and a husband she's struggling with? With what brain cells? Literally, we're not well.
Yeah. I want to shine a spotlight specifically on what you do. What happens in a typical deconstruction doula session, or can you walk us through what women experience in your groups?
Kind of the bread and butter of what I do is called cohorts. I call them peer-led cult deprogramming groups. And so it's 12 weeks. The first week you come in, we establish boundaries and expectations. There's a pretty extensive list. And some of that is because no one, sometimes these women are coming in and they've never been in a healthy environment where everyone gets a voice. And so we just have to literally set out boundaries and expectations around how do you share time and make sure that you get to have a voice and other people get to have a voice. But also if I ask you a question, you don't have to answer it. You can say, I don't want to answer it, and we'll just move on. You don't have to tell us why. We're going to ask personal questions, but you don't, because they've been trained to just immediately obey, So we have all these boundaries and expectations that we go through. And then I say, okay, why are you here? And always end up getting very extensive answers where people start sharing things that they've never told anyone before, because I don't know why. I mean, it's a huge honor that people trust this space so much. But by the end of the first call, people are emotional and feeling bonded. And so then we meet weekly for 12 weeks. After that, we have Marco Polo groups so we can talk throughout the week. So it's not just all, talking about the hard deconstruction and trauma stuff. It's also, I watched this movie, or I went to the park and saw this beautiful thing, or whatever. The lessons for the 12 weeks, the image that I think about is, we've had all these chains put on our brains essentially to strap them down and make them not go anywhere outside of what we were supposed to think and be. And with each lesson, I try to clip those chains so that you can just think for yourself. This is not about telling you what to think, how to think, who to listen to. It's not like that. I will tell you if something is a bold-faced lie, but I'll even say, this is what I think. I think that's a bold-faced lie, right? I mean, I come with my receipts. I have done my research. It's really about then giving space. I said lesson. I don't call them lessons. It's just a talk. It's just supposed to get the ball rolling so that when we get on that Zoom call, we can take the thoughts that I had in that talk and then we extrapolate and we go further with it. We take it in different directions. So it's very each cohort is completely different. Each call is completely different because it's very organic. It's very based on where the women in the group take it, what's going on with them. Sometimes we get on a call and one of the lessons or talks that I sent out hit them really, really hard. And they're having almost their bodies shutting down. It's just a heaviness, just sore. And you can see it on their faces. And I'll be like, should we just go to bed? And we'll wait till next week, or maybe we just sit and talk and we don't talk about the lesson. We can just talk and be together. So it's very, again, the doula, I take the doulaing very seriously. It's what the women in front of me need. One of our women, her daughter got diagnosed with cancer right at the very beginning of the 12 weeks of cohorts. And so that factors into how we handle things. It's just very organic and natural. And then I also have retreats. I try to keep my retreats clear of all of that hard processing that we do. So I do 6 Zoom calls before the retreat. So hopefully all of the sharing of stories and initial processing and the thing that we do where we say, oh, have you heard this or read this, or testing the waters to see how they respond to something so we know if we're safe. We get that all out of the way before so that by the time the retreat starts, again, this is mostly oldest daughters, mostly there's ex-missionaries, there's ex-pastors, they're exhausted, right? So for me, the retreat is about rest. It's about you getting fed instead of having to think about other people, who you're feeding, all your kids 3 times a day. It's about physical touch that's platonic and safe and for you. If you want it, we talk about boundaries around all that. We have so many anxious girlies and trauma girlies. And so I have a whole form that I have people fill out. What do you need to sleep? Just tell me and we'll make it happen. You need a fan, you need a weighted blanket, you need white noise. There's a lot of dietary stuff because of all the chronic illnesses. There's a lot of like, please don't touch me. We don't touch people who don't want to be touched. We just try and come in as well equipped to love each other well as possible for these retreats. And then we do crafts together. We sleep in. We have slow mornings. Spend time in nature. And it's really a lot of free time for people to just be. And it's crazy how many women tell me that they don't know if they've ever had time where they got to just be like that before. I try and make them as financially accessible as possible, but I can't bankroll it. I don't have money.
I wonder if these husbands are worried about losing their very obedient wives.
I think a lot of times the husbands also experienced some degree of whatever catalyst started her deconstruction. And so he's also hurting.
Okay. Right.
And so he's excited that she is getting help. And, he's benefiting because she's becoming more functional. She's feeling happier and more supported. And so he thinks things are getting better. It's just what their definition of like what better is and where the end goal is can start to change. And then that can cause problems.
And I think that's a good point, is that men aren't untouched in this. They have their own slew of issues growing up in this environment. What
I have observed, both growing up and then doing this work with people from different groups, is that so us girls, micromanaged, micro-controlled, like everyone had an opinion on our clothes and our hair and our attitude and all the things, how we talk to boys, like everything was like highly scrutinized, right? The boys were more neglected, specifically like emotionally neglected. There wasn't really an expectation put on them to be sweet, to be submissive. And I know that word is triggering, but really, like, in actuality, what it means is the ability to say, okay, I want this thing, but this other thing is actually more important. So I'm going to sublimate my like first desire and cooperate and go along. They never had to learn that because they were told, you're God's gift to the world, essentially. Boys, specifically in the world that I come from, were like, we need to just let them be who they are. All we have to do with boys is just make sure we don't stop them from being who they are. Let boys be wild, let them play, just let them go do and be. And so they get neglected because they're out there with a bunch of other boys, often who are not coming from the safest homes, whether it's physical abuse or sexual abuse or verbal abuse. It's a lot in these communities. And so, they're out playing with other boys and they're doing what kids do when they've got stuff to work through. It's showing up in their play. And we're also lionizing like aggressive boys who will like not take crap. And we're like encouraging them to be fighters and warriors. And we're using military language all the time. There's nothing about learning to be patient and gracious and kind and like respectful, yes, but like in the military way, like yes sir, yes ma'am, not respectful like I'm noticing that this person has this thing going on, so I'm going to adjust my behavior in this way,
And there's no room for them to have emotions outside of anger and aggression, basically, because those are the acceptable emotions to have.
My particular cult leader is Doug Wilson, and he has a whole book. It's on raising men, and he specifically says that mothers need to stop parenting their sons when they become men at 13 because they're going to make them effeminate. And so essentially what you're doing is you're removing the one person, and I'm not saying dads can't do this, dads can do this beautifully, but in that culture, the one person who would have been nurturing, who would have drawn out their emotions, who would have, encouraged them to like talk about how they're doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And you're just like leaving them in this very physical, not like physical and mental, but not embodied or emotional sort of world. I mean, the boys are cut off from having relationships, like friendly, platonic relationships with the girls, just as much as the girls are cut off from having those relationships with the boys. And so, the boys, like, I really, really tried to follow all the rules, but my parents just had slightly different rules. I was allowed to have guy friends, and I'm so glad. I feel like it's a big part of why I was able to get out as well as I did. I don't think that there's really any space, and I think there wasn't any space for the boys I grew up with to be human. They can't cry or be overwhelmed or be sad or like be frustrated enough to throw a temper tantrum, because then you get verbal abuse. You get called weak or a sissy, and those are like the worst things to be called in that culture. That's denial of like your humanity, essentially.
Yeah, and there's a lot of physical discipline.
There's a lot of physical discipline, and the boys did get it worse. Like, I talk a lot about how bad it was for the girls. The boys got it worse.
These people are conditioned to live
Right.
and this certain way, and to vote this certain way, and it's all part of an ecosystem.
I think one thing that I'm finding people have a hard time doing is connecting that influencer that they follow online who just started making sourdough 2 years ago with the realities that we're talking about. Like, we're talking about two different things here. And it's like, yes and no. Okay, so the influencer who's making the sourdough probably will never get into all this stuff, right? But the people who follow her account will also, the algorithm is going to start feeding all the cult stuff, all of it, right? So you actually might be selling something that you don't even know, understand, or ever have any recognition of how much you funneled people into it.
Excellent point.
Yeah. I'm not trying to say that sourdough is a gateway necessarily, but like, it seems like there are some innocent things that, because of the way social media operates, are kind of gateways to the content that's going to influence you that way.
Listen, I can tell you what it was for my parents' generation. Their gateway drug, their sourdough, was wanting to be good parents. A lot of people came from broken homes from that generation, right? Coming out of the war and everything, whether it was like abusive or negligent or abandonment or whatever, right? There's this like sense of like, I don't know how to do this, but I want to do it really well. Well, who is offering the answers? James Dobson, right? And James Dobson is just the tip of the iceberg for this whole thing. And it's like way more extreme under him. But even if you just got the James Dobson part, like, that's not great. Early influencing. I mean, it wasn't this before the internet is what it is now. It was before social media. But you have Focus on the Family, and it's telling you, okay, so you start listening because you want to understand your Bible better, or you want to be a good parent. Well, now you're getting, oh, this is Dave Ramsey, and he's going to tell you an entire way to interact with not just money, but business in general, and your neighborhood in general, and culture in general. And, you're going to have someone who's going to start giving you marriage advice and telling you that you need to cut the word divorce out of the dictionary, and it should be a word you never say. And like, it becomes, yeah, like you said, like an ecosystem, and it all just kind of plays into each other.
I'm sure that there's some women who have decided, hey, I want to get out of this dynamic, possibly this marriage, but you often don't have education. You often don't have the financial resources. So how do you guys help them? Have you faced that, and what does that look like?
We have had quite a few divorces, and the way that we help, it's very sensitive work. You can't just like come in there and tell people how to leave their spouse. And so really we are just there being a sounding board as she works through thinking about it, and just kind of doing the best we can, not to like influence, but like validate when there's certain things where it's like, okay, well, like by textbook definition, that would be considered abuse, and then we like show her, and, we talk through it, we work through it, but we don't put any pressure. But when she is ready to make the decision, again, everyone's exhausted, right? And so the mental load of leaving is really intense, especially if you have kids. There's so many things to think about. And so support can be as simple as like, hey, I'll do the research and I'll find you a good therapist in the area, or I'll find you a good divorce lawyer, or I'll do the work to like call the shelter and figure out what you need before you get there. We might have people in the area or in the area enough that they'll drive all day or whatever it takes to go and like physically be there to pack up and get her out safely. We have lots of people crashing on couches in guest bedrooms until they can figure something else out. You know, we help make resumes. We kind of keep a running list of jobs that would work for people coming out of these sort of situations, like the hours, their remote work, their entry level, they pay well. If a kid's crying in the background, it's not going to be an issue, kind of things. We, you know, keep a running like list of like education programs that could be accessible to women in our in these kinds of situations. And then, yeah, it's just really, you know, sending money to file for divorce or to cover groceries, or, you know, putting people on our cell phone plans, or, you know, giving them our Disney login. So while they're, you know, living out of a hotel for 2 weeks in the like initial leaving, their kid has something to watch so they can have the calls with the lawyers and with the whoever, right?
So how can people, you know, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I want to support this, I want to support what Margaret does, I want to support these women that are trying to find their way, how would they go about doing that?
So the easiest one is our GoFundMe. And right now it's empty. There's nothing coming in right now. So we don't really have any resources right now to share with the community. Financially, at least, we always have, you know, all the other things. So GoFundMe. And then we also have a Patreon. And the nice thing about Patreon is that it comes with added benefits. We have a public podcast, but we also have an internal facing one where we can talk more about things specifically for people who like really understand this culture, or maybe have loved ones who are trapped in it and they don't know how to like help them get out and stuff like that. We have lots of resources on our Patreon. Those would be the two biggest ways to help. And then also the algorithm hates us. We are not.
It's not aesthetically pleasing to be against the ones that are so aesthetically beautiful, huh?
Yeah. The algorithm hates us. So anytime you can comment, like, share, whatever is super, super helpful, and it costs nothing, but it really, really helps us. So yeah, I think those are the big ways.
Okay, we'll link your GoFundMe and your Patreon and your Instagram in our show notes so that you guys can click on there if you feel like this is something that you want to get behind. She is at Deconstruction Doulas, plural, on Instagram. And you guys can follow her there as well. And if you're interested in participating in a program or in a cohort, they can find your website linked on your Instagram, correct?
Yeah. And I do have a new round of cohorts starting soon. If anyone, there's still room.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being a guest today. I feel like I got validated a lot because you reflected back to me so many things that I have either felt or experienced. And so I appreciate that on a personal level. But I love just how we've kind of gone behind the scenes of the sourdough and the sepia tones and really seen the inner workings and gears of what Tradwife life can snowball into.
And circle back to sourdough for a second, because I feel like I need to say something, because someone's listening who does not identify with trad life at all, but likes to make sourdough. I would just like to say for many, many, many months, Katie made sourdough and taught sourdough classes.
Yes, I am a sourdough
still
person.
It makes beautiful boules. My gosh. But so, you know, they don't have a corner on the market with sourdough. And I just want to say that.
The funny thing is, like, so many of us were like, I wish I had time to do the Tradwife stuff, you know? Like, that's the lie, is that it's successful for any of us.
Yeah. And, you know, something recently we talked about on our podcast talking about rest.
Yeah, I think it was.
And just how the patriarchy conditions us to where we to feel guilty when we're resting, because our value is the utility value we have to another person. And so I think the Tradwife life is also playing into that your value is the utility you have to somebody else, and rest is not something that's valuable or something that you deserve or need. And it's not even something that there's room for in these situations. There's not space for rest. That's why I love that you let them sleep in and have slow mornings, because that's just something that you don't have when you're in that life.
It's like the greatest gift ever. They're always like, I'm like, what was your favorite part of the retreat? I got to sleep in. I'm like, amen, sister.
Yes. Yeah. So I love what you do, and I am happy that we can maybe shine a light on that a little bit for you. And I appreciate you being a supporter of us and just giving your time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, guys. And thank you for all that you do.
I know a lot about Katie's different experiences secondhand from her. And I just so appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's beautiful. I think it's very needed. And I'm just so happy that there's someone like you who's doing this type of work. So thank you so much. And thanks for sharing all of it with us and on our platform. And I hope it's very eye-opening for a lot of our listeners. So just thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.